Wake up, buyer payer people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhoads on the Buy Here Pay Here Morning Show. Take it away, you two.
Good morning.
Hey, happy Friday, y'all.
Yeah.
Glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back in the home studio. And so those of you who have been out there waiting for me to return emails and all of the other things, today I'll be doing that.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind for you, for sure. Well, you were away.
I was away. And then yesterday we had such a great afternoon and got to watch our nephew graduate from high school and experience that. It brought back a lot of really just like memories of times like when I went through high school and graduated, and when I watched my children do the same thing. And my brother's quite a bit younger than I am. And so his kids are, I think he still has a junior high student. And so he's got 2 more left to graduate. And it was beautiful to just sit there and reminisce, which actually ties very well into our topic today after we finish the announcements.
Yeah, I also quite enjoyed watching the nephew go through graduation. It's just always fun to sit there and watch all these young people and where will they go with their lives, right? Like, you watch them and you kind of say, that one looks like it might be a doctor. That one,
and it's like you go, there's the football guy because he's like, because they had this thing set up so that as each name was read, they were standing at a camera because it was in a huge arena. And so up on the big Megatron, you could see the student holding their diploma. And as they read their name, which we didn't have when I went through high school, it was just, you just watched a parade of people and blah, 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 blah. And so it was really kind of fun. And it was fun to see potentiality, like fear in some of them. It's like, and some are like, dude, I got just this really interesting energy from them. This, you'd look at them and you go, oh man, this was a big fish in a little pond.
Yeah.
Or this was a little fish in a big pond. And it's like, it's so interesting to watch when they
pretty easy to spot the class clowns too.
Oh, it was. Oh my gosh. Some of the things that we saw were hilarious, but it was about, just for me, it was like thinking back and remembering when I graduated from high school and which was like, frick, it's been forever ago. And to reminisce on growth.
Yeah.
And change and things like that. It was really lovely.
Yeah. So I had a chance last night. We had a V8 group meeting, and I was actually able to bring out this photo that we're going to show today. And it just kind of inspired.
I really want to hear all of the the comments. Like what were people's reaction when we show this photo? So this is you take how you want to introduce this.
So let me just kind of tell the backstory before we actually show the photo. So I came across in some archives, been cleaning up Google Drive stuff and rearranging this and that, and came across this old photo, and it just blew me away. Like it seems like, I don't know. It seems like it wasn't that long ago. When I look at the photo, I just look so young. I guess you can go ahead and show the photo. That
all right, I'm bringing it up. You ready? Okay.
So this photo, it's a terrible image. It's
y'all.
This is the best I can do.
So anyone who is listening today on the syndicated podcasts, please go to YouTube so you can see this.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this photo before, and I was just like, oh my goodness. He's just so little.
Yeah, such a kid. Looked like a junior high kid practically. But it just cracks me up to think about. Because I told you this morning, like I look at the photo and I think, man, that's like 23 years ago. And it's like, it looks to me like, more like 30 or 40 years of change, in the amount of gray from what I was back then. But then
the beard is new.
Yeah. And, it's kind of, as you kind of reflect on these stages of your life, I think, at that point, This photo was taken probably in early 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, I think it was 1988 that I opened my first business. I was a partner in a business when I was 24 years
So
old.
this is something, this, oh, let me put that back up there. This is something that we were talking about this morning. And when this photo was taken, you were about how old?
About 38, I think.
About 38.
Mm-hmm.
And, just like, even when you look at this and you think about everything that happened prior to that.
Yeah. I'd lived a lot of life already by then. I had a lot of experiences. I'd had business succeed and I had a business fail by the time that, this photo was taken. And I was a consultant. So maybe we back up and kind of tell the story. When I shared the description on the show today, I said that, this was, this, at the time this was taken, I was starting to write articles, so I was a green consultant. I had started as so let me kind of back up and give people the chronology, because I had owned sporting goods and pawn shop businesses. Like I was a partner in the business for like 5.5 years. Partnership split up because we had different ideas about where we wanted to go. And I sold out of my piece and went and opened a sporting goods store, which was a terrible idea. It was very seasonal. It was a small enough market. And, in retrospect, it's like, it was a flawed strategy. And so that business tanked. And I went to, not to mention the other lesson that is still very, might as well have been yesterday, the lessons of, how burnout I became. I was working 6 days a week, sometimes 6.5, and I had young kids at home, and it just was, on that hamster wheel we talk about, it just was killing me. And I thought, this is not worth it. Like, I'm barely breaking even in my business, and it's like, it's not worth it.
I'm taking notes because it's like, there's some really good nuggets here. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I think this is all still kind of, when I think about some of those lessons from early on, like some of the stuff very much forms the, the strategies and ideas that I bring to clients now.
Yeah.
And so this is stuff that, I was experiencing some of this stuff way back. But in 95, after closing this sporting goods store, I went down to the local Dodge dealership. Back then they had, these Dodge Rams that were starting to get popular. They had Dodge Caravans that everybody seemed to be driving. And
do you remember when Dodge Caravans were new and they were like, oh, these are so, because before that it was like the big kind of like conversion type vans.
Right.
Yeah.
The minivan.
The minivan. Yeah.
And so when the minivan came along, that was about the time that I was, talking about 95, and I stepped into a new car store, and it was, there's a whole story around that when I was actually hired. But again, I was, young, but I'd already had businesses. And so I stepped into that situation, and that was in Oklahoma City area. And I worked there for about a year. It was a really great learning experience. We've told that story on the podcast
with new
before.
New car experience
and the training that I received there, and kind of the introduction to, the car sales, like traditional sales. And I think the part that's relevant there is, even back then, I knew right away as a salesperson that I wanted to be the kind of salesperson who built up a clientele that earned repeat and referral business, who did business by appointments.
People could trust.
I knew
too. Yes.
I knew from the very early days, that's why I wanted to be.
One of the things I remember you talking about, because, as we reminisce, which we do, you were talking about how, the high pressure sales of a lot of the other salespeople, and that like, there was a typical percentage that would get unwound because they oversold, overpromised, over whatever. And people came back and they were like, I do not want this. This is not what I told it was going to be, all of that. And I remember you telling me that you had incredibly low rewinds.
Oh, none. I don't remember one.
Don't remember one. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
Don't remember one. And it was because even at that time, you found such value in being transparent, in being honest, in being open, and knowing what it was that, being able to educate people along the way.
Yeah. And I was a salesperson. Sure. That was my title or whatever was on the business card. But I always viewed myself more as a kind of consultant advisor, even in that. And sometimes, they would say sales consultant, right, on the business card. But I was, for all practical purposes, I was a salesperson on the front line with all these other, and the great learning experience, because that dealership, that I was with for that year went through major changes in the year I was there. And I actually witnessed, kind of as a business person, watch what happened there. And there were some lessons in that as well. But then in 97, I'd already transferred to another dealership closer to where I lived. And that dealership had 4 Dodge and Chrysler stores around the state of Oklahoma. And they came to me one day and said, would you please go open our Buy Here, Pay Here store across town? And that time they already had 5 of them.
Did you know what Buy Here, Pay Here was?
No, they had to put me on a plane and give me a little booklet, and they sent me out for intense training. So this is where Tommy Brandis and the Rick Reeves story,
because you went to Rick Reeves training camp.
Training, yeah. And it was very much it was an intensive. It was like 5 long days of training, and I learned an awful lot. And I came back and it just fell in love with that business. One, the hours were better. Like I was going home earlier, and I had a young family still, right? And so this was all part of the transition for me. But that's 1997 that I started managing a Buy Here, Pay Here store after a couple of years in new car, and kind of was like a trainer / senior salesperson, did some desking of deals and sales management. So I was exposed to those things. I never worked F&I. I probably could have had a good career in F&I, but I was back to the sales part. I knew early on, like I wanted to, I was helping people buy, but I wasn't overselling. Right. And so that's why my customer satisfaction index ran super high, or sales satisfaction index was always super high. And so it just was the nature. That was my approach to sales. And it still is, really, as you know.
Well, and it's one of the things that we were also talking about this morning that you mentioned, and I've heard you say this so many times. So I'm not a car guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I can see that. You're not a car guy. You're a finance guy. You're a problem solver. You're it's very different. The approach that you've taken in your career around the industry it's like, it's not about cars, and it's, I'm not a car guy.
And if it were about cars, I would have been out of the business a long time ago, because I don't know cars. And I said that to our V8 group last night. That came up, and I just said, here I am 20 plus years around the industry, but I still am not a car guy. I still don't know cars, And so we had to involve other people when it came to buying cars and evaluating cars and that sort of thing. But I'm just a finance person. Like I definitely latched onto the finance side. I could make sense of that and help people, kind of find a financing solution that fit. But then it's also just about people. So if you go back to my retail and sporting goods days, I mean, here I am 24 years old and a partner in a business that's very successful, and we're building a nice business. And I remember back in those days, like I definitely felt like this is really more about people than it is about products. It's about, for people to come and choose to do business with us. Some of it's marketing messaging. You've heard me talk about, I've been interested in messaging, especially the messaging element of marketing, since my earliest days. And even sitting back in college courses. Right. So I just think that's part of what kind of shaped how I viewed all of these things, as I moved through that career. But after managing that store in Oklahoma, the Buy Here, Pay Here lot, for about 2.5 years, I was at a conference, and the people who provided us training and software kind of pulled me aside and said, hey, we're going to be hiring some consultants. Would you have an interest? And so that led to me picking up the family and moving to Sarasota, Florida.
Which is about when this picture was...
Yeah, that would have been.
So this was
probably, I'd been with that company about 6 months, maybe, when this picture was taken.
Yeah, because you were now writing, and they needed some kind of a headshot for you to be added to articles that you were writing around. In the Buy Here, Pay Here magazines and things.
Yeah, and I've told part of those stories. Like I started working with dealers who, cute. Even the managers that I was working with, many of them had much more experience than I did, and they knew it. And I knew it.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily bring more experience. So I had to find my own way to bring value in those conversations. And it took me a little bit, but I settled in pretty quickly.
Yeah. So this actually, the journey from here to here is really not the topic. Right. It's not let's go down memory lane and talk about Jim's journey, but it's about a question that we were asking ourselves. And you've been thinking about this. And while I was in Mexico, there's some things that I'm working on that are kind of like my soul's work, my, the things that I really, this is the buy here, pay here, and the coaching. This is very much so what you just feel very called and to do. And I'm working on developing the things that I feel like I really want to do. And so I was with my best girlfriends and I was talking about, I know what it is overall, but I'm not sure how to approach. And so one of my friends who is a multiple published author, she actually was in a magazine recently as one of the top, and I think it was Maxim magazine, one of the top 2024 influencers to watch, female influencers. And she's done a lot of public speaking and all that. And she said, I had a coach once that asked me this question. And she says, once I understood this, that all of the things kind of fell in place. And it's like, what are the top 10 things you've learned? Like, what are the top 10 things that you've learned in your life that just have really shaped who you are?
Right.
And so I was like, and I took a lot of time to just sit back and go, what are the top 10 things that I've learned? And once I kind of tapped into that, it was like, and it made sense. But it was also so incredibly beautiful to think back, because we don't spend enough time celebrating where we are today. And it's like all of the things that we've experienced and the growth that we've experienced because we're always so stuck in today, and it's like, oh, it sucks. I haven't made enough this, or I need to do this. And it's just like, stop for a second and look back at what it is that and it's about gratitude as well. But it's like, what are the things that you've learned, the top 10 things? And so I shared this with Jim while I was on the trip, and he'd been thinking about this in a different way. And so this is kind of like, when you look at, we'll add this, when you look at this person who's green around the ears or whatever, and he's still not, he's already had more than a decade of experience working with people. What is it that you see in those eyes that is just like, oh my goodness, if I could tell you the stuff you're going to learn over the next couple of decades?
Yeah. And I think we're going to cover that coming up. Like, I think what I anticipate, we're going to cover this over a couple of episodes because, there are a lot of things that I can say that I feel like I understand today differently. Like, that's going to be fun to kind of talk about the things that I feel like I now understand that I didn't understand back then. For today, I thought it might be simpler to stay with the stuff that is things I feel like I knew back then that are still true. And so that's really about this whole customer service, customer success side. And I think the other part of it, I just still remember, my approach to all of these things was that, I enjoyed the customers. Were there customers that were difficult? Of course. Did I let that ruin, my attitude and approach to the next customer? No, I can honestly say, even back when I was managing, that I didn't. And I think it's part of how if you're going to continue to serve and produce business, and if you really think of yourself as providing a service and you're really trying to solve a problem for people, then you're gonna shed those, the influences of the problem customers, and the bad situations. And because if you bring that attitude into every customer, you're going to stunt your business.
Yeah. And after this photo, after you stepped into consulting, you also had a period of time where you were a dealer. You owned your own buy here, pay here dealership.
Right.
And you went through the crash of 08
Right,
and like the lessons learned through that, and found, when I listened to your story, it's like you found that I can how do I put this? Being a dealer is such an important role that we play. We play a role of being able to help people that are unbankable and there's a lot of different models, a lot of different ways that people do that, and that it's, as I've observed you, this is just my take, is that you recognize that you could help the customers more
Mhm.
by helping dealers be better
Yeah.
and learn how to run a tighter ship, how to, all the straight lines and all the squiggly line stuff. It's like I can teach and help others be able to be good to their customers, and to
Yeah.
help customers be successful, and to learn about how do you find repeat customers, how do you get referrals, how do you do these things, because you
Mhm.
were very successful at that with your dealership too,
Mhm.
about
Sure.
repeats and referrals. And it was just like these are proven things, and they're philosophies that you have taken all through your career, whether it be in buy here, pay here, but it's just there are threads of that through all of
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, I can't say that,
Yeah.
even though I certainly talked about things that would be in the category that we call squiggly lines. And for
Mhm.
those who might be hearing us talk about that for the first time, you're mostly talking about the intangibles of business,
Mhm.
right? There's the black and white stuff that shows up
Mhm.
in numbers and financial statements, and then there's the things that are less tangible and that certainly still have an impact on our business. So that's all those things like culture and trust, and the repeat and referral part you're talking about. So that was definitely a thing. I think the other part that is relevant here is, like, when I think back to my own time in owning a dealership, and the fact, even when I came into consulting before I owned a dealership, I still was mindful of the entrepreneurship element, and in particular the courage that was required to step into entrepreneurship in this particular space. So in 2005, after this consulting period, like this, about 4 years, 4.5 years maybe after this photo was taken, I was opening my own dealership. And there's a story there about how that even came to be, but because that really wasn't in the plans. It's just another one of those twists and turns in life, and found myself in
Flow.
situations that just go, just let's go open one,
Mhm.
and so I just kind of moved into that. And but there's a courage element, right? There's some courage required in any level of entrepreneurship, just to step out
Mhm.
there and run something on your own. It's going to live or die by your own successes and experience. And buy here, pay here, there's an additional level of courage, because you're stepping into this space that is, it's just high risk. It's perceived as high risk. And certainly if it's not done right, it can end badly. And so there's that element too. And I'm mindful of that, in the work that we do, and working with consultants, or working with dealers rather. They're they're out there taking that risk, and they're providing an important service. We talk about that some. And I think I was mindful of that even back then. And I've shared this, I think, on the podcast in the past, but I think when I see that picture of that guy, I remember, I think the part of the story that's particularly relevant as it goes, yeah, that's particularly relevant is, I stepped into the role of director of training and consulting at about the time this photo was taken. And so why? Because I was kind of the only one around to take the job. I mean, I was really
By
true.
default.
There's a whole story there, but it's not that I was any
Those of
kind
you who are familiar with that era and all of that will kind of understand that. But it's just like Jim's just like, yep, I'll do it.
well,
Yep.
and for you young people, you can just Google search the .com bubble, because
Yeah.
we were riding the .com bubble, and that photo was taken about the time the .com bubble was bursting, and I was kind of the last person in the room, and I became the director of training consulting. And so it was a great learning experience, because I stepped in there again with that attitude of repeat and referral business. I told the story about how back then we had fax machines, and all these cancellations were coming in because the company was
Mhm.
kind of in this weird kind of transition,
Uh-huh.
and so it was understandable. And I remember that I really approached it, um, and I tried to let those dealers out gracefully. I just kind
Mhm.
of said, "Look, we get it. I understand from your perspective why this, and so just know that we're going to be over here working to provide value, and we hope to see you back here one day." And
Yeah.
little by little, we brought many of those back over the years.
May I ask you, side
Sure.
squirrel, had you been ungraceful about it, do you think they would have come back?
Well, I mean, I guess I could say that maybe if you're providing value, maybe they would find you their way to you if you're providing value, period. But certainly it made it easy for them to come back in,
To
right?
step back in.
Right.
Yeah,
I
because
just try
it's
to make
like,
it, yeah, and
hey,
so
still got a place for me kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I was professional and graceful about it, and trying to, let them out, and just try to reassure them that we would be working to rebuild the thing. And so we set about doing that, and we were small. We shrunk to a fraction, but our personnel was also a fraction of what it had been. And so we were successful in that department, and we slowly built it back up. And it just, little by little, as we create a value. And I think the relevant thing for me is, and so this is advice really for anybody who's new in consulting and working with people in business. Like, where I had success was not that I showed up and went to these meetings with dealers some of these dealers have been in business for a decade or more and had, well-established businesses. So what's this young kid who's just been a manager for a couple of years? What's he going to tell me that I don't know about my business already? And so what I recognized early on is what I had to do was make sure that I understood their numbers well, that I got inside their numbers. I've always been a bit of a numbers person. But I think the most significant thing that I did in those days was I created what we called weekly initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just sort of project management and identifying. I had to work with the management. Often those meetings had the manager and the dealer there, or at least a manager and a general manager. And so we're working with them, and we're identifying, okay, what's the thing that we most want to fix? So maybe that's aged inventory, maybe that's delinquency.
Over the course of like usually it was like the next week, you might have longer initiatives, but it was usually broken down by what are the initiatives of the week.
Yeah. So these were ongoing engagements with dealers in different parts of the country. I traveled all over the eastern half of the country mostly in that time. And so we had clients as far west as Idaho, I remember, and Utah. And so then, but also all over the East Coast.
I can see how, when someone is feeling the pinch of the need for improvement, that very frequently it's just like, I'm going to throw everything at the thing and see if it works. And I can see this weekly initiatives, because I've worked with you in this, is that it's the tortoise approach. It's like, it's not that you're not moving, but I'm going to focus on one thing so I can celebrate the one thing, measure the one thing, and then move on to the next thing, instead of, I'm going to try 17 things because I put this out there and, asked people, and they all said, you should do this, you should do this. So I'm going to try them all. And I can see and that's just kind of your style. It's like, all right, so let's make a list of all of the things you want to do. What are we going to tackle this week?
Right.
And, at the end of the week, it's like, did we get it done? Did we not get it done? Do we need more time? Is it worth the effort to do the thing? And then you come in, it's like, what do you want to tackle this week? And it's such a beautiful thing that you bring to just helping people break stuff down and take it one bite at a time and slowly. Let's fix the thing.
Many of those folks would say that, especially if you take some of those general managers, they learned through watching us go through that process. Not that I knew buy here, pay here more than they did. What I knew was if I can keep us on target in this meeting, and we can set targets that are, I used to tell them, we're going to set these initiatives, and I'm going to work with the general manager to set these targets at a place where we're going to achieve them about 80% of the time. So that's kind of what we were striving to set the target.
That 20% creates growth, and the 80% creates accomplishment.
Well, you want it achievable. You don't want people to get frustrated about it, but you got to set it high enough that it's,
stretching.
It's going to stretch a little bit, and it's going to make people go do the thing. And so that's where that photo of that guy, that's what that guy did. That's how we were able to have some success and kind of build the department. And you start to see dealers who they'd been in business 10 years and their line of receivables and their portfolio size looked like this. Well, after we did this approach for week after week after week, you start to see these things go up. You start to see delinquency improve. It requires less of our time in management. We're able to focus a little more of our time on sales or whatever. And so you just start to move the needle. And so this is where I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't have to be the expert who knew more than everybody, and so, and I can say that I didn't bring a lot of ego to those in those days. I was pretty modest. I knew that most everybody I was working with had a lot more experience than I did. And so this was the approach. And so now, I look forward and I can say that there's so many things, obviously, that I can say that I have a perspective about now that I didn't back then. One of my favorite stories, and we can wrap up, but it's like, I've told the story. You've heard it so many times. Like I met a dealer. I was on a consulting visit, which wrapped up early. And on the way back to the airport, I had a couple of hours extra. So I swung by a dealer who was on my roster that I'd never met. And it was a dealer who was kind of using our software maybe. And I just stopped in to say hello to him, chatted with him for a little bit. And, as we started to kind of wrap up, I told him, you already know the story. You know what story I'm going to tell. But it's an example of the kind of lessons that I was able to learn just by being out there in the field and working with people. And I still say, back then, and it's still true, when I do these consulting visits, I often learn as much as I teach. Typically, that's true. So,
If you step in the spirit of teaching, I mean, I agree. As long if we talked about the ego thing, if you're teaching without ego, you're there to learn too.
Learn. You got to have your ears
if you
open.
teach with ego, you're there to dictate.
Yeah.
And it's like that. It's like, I am the authority, and when you teach to learn, you ask questions in the process of teaching, and you learn things from each other.
And that wasn't the case here. I mean, I wasn't there to coach. I was just there to meet this guy, and we chatted for a little bit. And I just, in my kind of young bravado, I said, I think I could probably help you, increase your business here and increase your sales. And he kind of looked at me funny and just, without smiling.
He wanted to pat you on the head and go, there.
Almost.
Okay. So he's like looking at this, and he's patting him on the head, and he's like, there.
He said, okay. Jim, he said, he was real kind about it. He said, Jim, I appreciate that. He said, I sell 25 cars a month, and I don't want to sell 26. And I learned something just like that in that moment. Like, it's just
more is not what everybody should or
like,
wants or needs.
Right.
And
there were other dealers that I talked to that had a similar approach. They liked stable, they liked consistent, they wanted to make sure that they were sticking to their practices. And so there's validity in that, right? But I think that's what I remember about that young consultant is there was a lot of really great lessons that I learned in that early on. And so, we can sometimes get a little tangled up in business models and strategies and why it should be one over the other. And it's so fun in these V8 meetings. Like, we had 6 or 7 people on the screen last night, and you had all these bar graphs, and like, they're all over the place in terms of, business approach and percentage of down payment and all these different ways that they do business. Will they all learn from one another, and maybe eventually those lines will be closer together, perhaps, but they're all in business for a while.
But they create questions and so you're able to have a conversation and learn. And that's what teaching is really. It's like, so what did you do here? How did you do that? And so,
but I think the math
learning from
is
each
the
other.
math, and so this is one of the things I shared with you that I think one of the topics that I'll be bringing forward in the coming weeks, whether it's through blog posts or the podcast or both, is this idea that, people talk about cash is king. And I'm going to say, look, I don't know if cash is king, but I do know that cash is cash. And I think when we can get used to just kind of, we get so tangled up in all these KPIs and all these ratios and all these other numbers. And it's like, the way I said it in our meeting last night is, we can't meet payroll with contracts. You can have a big portfolio of contracts, but you can't use those contracts to pay your people at the end of the week.
Or your light bill.
Right.
Or whatever.
And so it's like, we gotta, so I just focus on cash and cash flow, and I have dealers out there who, are grateful that I bring that approach, but I'm like, I'm just focusing on the math, and we're working through the math, and we're just saying, look, we're not out there to just create receivables that we're never going to put in the bank. So this was all part of my approach back then. And it just kind of evolves. But I think, in future episodes, we'll talk more about the things that I've learned. I think that when we talk about where I sit today as a coach, I think you're going to find there's more of the squiggly lines pieces. There's a lot more of the heart element that comes into business now in my coaching than it would have been, that we would have had back then. And, it all matters. It's like, to some they're on a hamster wheel and they're just focused on buying cars and selling cars and what have you. And with some of them, I'm successful in getting them to step off that hamster wheel just long enough to really think about, what are we working toward here?
Yeah.
So that's more the coach that I've kind of feel.
And I would say, like, from Michelle's perspective, from the topic, take a minute, or actually more like 20 or more. But take time to reflect on what your 10 greatest lessons have been. And like the things that have made you better, the things that have made you kinder, the things that have made you more approachable, the things that have helped you to be able to be the place that people like to come, or just like take the time. And it's important, especially when we're getting into the minutia, we're getting into the day to day, we're getting into the stress of the stuff and that weight of like all of the things. And sometimes it's really healing. It just kind of resets you to just take some time and look at all of the great things and to remember, it's like, don't be too hard on yourself, but look at all of the great things. And then, those great things are the things that, if we've learned big lessons, those are the things that really we have a great opportunity to teach others.
Yeah.
Too.
And I think, again, in a future episode, we'll go into more of the stuff that I feel like we know today. I think some of the stuff, again, that we knew back then was that can't really keep doing the same things and expect a different result. So those are the things
down. Yeah.
So that's part of where the weekly initiative thing came from.
Yeah.
We show up here and we talk about the same thing. That's part of what I came into the consulting thing, is it looked like the thing was almost canned. Like it's almost the process at that time was everything was kind of regurgitated, and you said the kind of the same things week after week. And I think that doesn't bring any value to anybody. I don't enjoy it. The dealer doesn't enjoy it. So we start to step out of that and start just pick pieces and do that. So I just think you don't change the thing. You want to make progress, but you can't keep doing the same thing week after week and expect things to shift.
What do they say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result?
Right. And I think that young guy in the photo, I think I knew that back then.
Yeah.
I think I was aware, and I thought we don't need to keep doing the same thing. It's not changing anything. You can, I see the charts.
What a beautiful lesson. Yeah.
And so, so it was a way that we help dealers kind of see their business in a new way and start to help them learn how to fix the stuff themselves.
Yeah.
Now after I stepped out or disengaged, did they fall back into their own habits? I don't always know, but it's like, this is part of where I was trying to affect change as a young consultant. And so it made a difference for some. And so again, we'll talk more in the future about, kind of what the gray-haired consultant knows today that I didn't know back then.
Yeah. I love hearing the stories, and I'm looking forward to them as well. And so thanks so much for joining us. It's Friday.
Yeah.
And you've got a great, beautiful weekend. It's Memorial Day on Monday.
Okay. Nice.
And so, I'm already all planning out with my mom. We got to go around and all of the things.
Yeah.
But it's a great time to remember too. And so this is really a perfect time for you to sit back during Memorial Day weekend and spend a little time reflecting on what are the greatest lessons I've learned.
Good.
And so there's your little challenge for the weekend. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your time at your dealership with your employees and your customers and with your family. And we will see you on Monday.
Yep.
Monday. Thanks, guys, so much for joining.